Video three, man, the first two are nerve wracking. This is exciting. Video three, um, we've got some second and third parts of the first two videos. Um, a 5-part series following up on our last video to explain the importance of some of the different aspects of location, appliance selection, lifestyle, backup power, uh, home size. But I figured I wanted to take a step back and kind of dig into the basics to set kind of a framework for understanding because most people understand being connected to the grid. They understand when the power company feeds your house, how does your house work? What most people don't understand is how an off-grid house works. And it's really different. It's really, really, really different. Um, it's not hard to get used to. It's really quick. It's a pretty easy switch once you think about it differently. After you've lived there for a year, most of our customers are completely aware of how their off-grid system powers the house, different from how the last house they owned or an on-grid house would normally power it. So we're going to go into that. So today, the video series, there's 2 parts to this: mistakes in powering off-grid homes, how we throw our money away. And I see this so much. In fact, my number one warning to everybody out there trying to build an off-grid home: if you don't know what you're doing to design it, you're going to waste tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how big the off-grid home is. I have had systems, $300,000-$400,000 systems, and there's so many ways to do it wrong. And most of the content I've seen online is it's not bad content, but it only works for a very specific customer's needs. So please do your research. Please do your research. Um, the worst ones I've seen are multiple $100,000 systems that don't work. So like you can't fix bad design with more money, usually. Like there's an infinite amount of money you could waste on bad design. So please take that away from this video. Good design saves you so much money. It makes your system so reliable. It makes the aesthetic of the system clean when you're done. So design it well. And that's what we're going to go into. How to design it well, how to avoid these mistakes that everybody makes or that most people make. There are some good off-grid installers out there. Um, so that the system that you build or the systems that your company builds run for a really long time, are low cost to maintain, they're low cost to install, and the customer experience is fantastic. Um, the homeowner experience, your experience living in the home is incredible. There's nothing quite like living in an off-grid home, and I have a video coming up on that. So the goal of any off-grid power system, super simple. This is the design criteria, the design guidance for building an off-grid home. To deliver power to the house when the house needs it. Seems super simple. Why are we talking about this? When you're on grid, there's $1 trillion of infrastructure, depending on what country you're in. Sometimes it's only 100 billion. That makes so that if you want to go turn something on in your house, it turns on, and everybody pays for that. Every person in every state, every town, every country pays a bill every month, and they pay impact fees. And the government incentivizes infrastructure. What you have to understand is the ability to just turn something on and have it run is a billions and billions of dollar or $1 trillion infrastructure problem. And we don't see that because it's embedded in the cost of our lot. It's embedded in the cost of our city. It's embedded in our taxes and fees. It's embedded in the impact fees the developer paid before you bought the house, and the fees that you pay every month when you purchase the house, and the taxes you pay every year. It's everywhere. Um, in an off-grid system, you're building a highly, highly efficient system. On-grid systems are wildly inefficient. The power grid is built to be able to handle so much more power than you are going to see at any given moment. At any given moment, the power line on the side of the road there's only power going through it at about 1/10 or 1/20th of its rated capacity, right? Uh, but on a off-grid house, you have to build it. The more efficiently you build it, the more closely what you produce, and this is the big concept, what you produce matches what you need the less expensive your system is and the more reliable it is. And so here's the thing. When do you produce power in an off-grid system? Generally, when the this immediately leads to the first problem with designing off-grid homes. I call it the day to night problem. We produce power during the day. How do we get it to the night? And generally the answer is you store it in some kind of battery. If it were a sunny day in the summer, the load of your house, right? Because there's two sides to this equation. You have to know when you're producing power and you have to know when you're using it. Um, and the harder part of this equation by far is when do we use power? And it can feel a little bit random, but here's how a power graph generally works. When we use power changes day to night, and it changes summer and winter or spring and fall. And so you've got the day to night problem that you have to solve, but you also have the summer to winter problem that you have to solve. And so what we're going to do is we're going to overlay two graphs. When do you use power normally in the summer on average? And when do you produce power? So we're going to go with green for when do we produce power from a solar panel system. And generally, this is not always the graph depending on where the angle is, but a nice south-facing solar panel system is going to start producing a little bit of power at 6 a.m. in the summer. And then that power graph is going to go up, 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 and peak around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's going to come down really hard on the other side. And I probably drew that a little bit too far to the right, but you're going to stop producing power about 7 p.m. Okay? If I was a better artist, that would look like a better parabola or a better bell curve. This is when we produce power. This is when we use power. We use power when we wake up in the morning and we start. We're always using at least a little bit of power. So we're using a little bit of power here. We're going to say that this is 300 watts. This is 2,000 watts. And this is, say, 6,000 watts. I know it's not like to scale, but you're using a small amount of power. You wake up in the morning and you turn on your coffee maker. And your kids wake up and you turn on the microwave. You turn on a toaster. And you get ready and you go to work and you don't have as much power use. But in the summer, what happens is you generally have an HVAC load. And so by about 10, 11 in the morning, your HVAC system kicks on. It'll use a bunch of power. And it kind of spikes like this. And it actually peaks in my area about right there. And that's your HVAC load. When you get home from work at night, you also turn on the oven, you watch some TV, you plug in your laptop. And so you'll often see something like an early morning spike of use, but not very much because the HVAC is off. A decent amount of use through the middle of the day, and you'll often see even a higher peak, maybe something like that. And then it kind of tails off. And you need a battery proportionate to the area under the graph not covered by the solar, because when there's no sun, that's how big of a battery you need. That's the day to night problem. You've got to shift the power you're producing during the day into the night. And these aren't to scale. I think if we were doing it closer to scale, this is more like that, because you have to have some excess, right? You have to have some excess power here. Crosshatch it the other way to store in the battery. This is the simplest version of this problem. It gets more complicated because this is assuming it's sunny outside. Anything you can do when you're designing your house or picking your appliances that shifts your power load from nighttime into when the sun is up reduces the size of your battery system. Unless you needed that battery to solve one of the other two problems. So the way we size a battery system is we solve the day-to-night problem and say, okay, I need generally 18 kilowatt hours to get through the night. Our batteries are generally 14 kilowatt hours each. So we'd say, okay, so 2 batteries, it's 28 kilowatt hours. That gets us through the night every single time. And then we'd take that same size and say, okay, Does that solve our other problems? Because this is the summer day to night problem. 18 kilowatt hours is plenty. One of the things is in the summer, your days are way longer and your load, your HVAC is during the day. In the winter, the day to night problem looks different. So here's where it starts to get sketchy. There's some differences in the day to night problem, summer versus winter. The first big difference is in the summer, you've got 14-hour long days. In the winter, you have like a 10 and a half hour solar window. It's much reduced. So the first thing that happens is your solar, instead of starting at 6 a.m., starts at like 8 a.m. It comes up, it comes up, it comes up, it comes up. It peaks around 3 o'clock, goes down, goes down, goes down, goes down, and it ends somewhere at around 6, a little tail on the graph. Okay, this is what your solar output in the winter looks like. That's your solar output graph in the winter. You're missing this area and the peak because your system is going to produce all of this excess power in the summer. Okay. And then the other issue you have is your load graph looks wildly different in this winter than it does in the summer. Your load is primarily at night. And so you still have a decent amount of power use from waking up 6, 7 o'clock. If you go to work, your kids go to school, it's about the same time. But the problem is your HVAC load, your heating load, if you're heating with electricity especially, is at nighttime. And if you're heating with propane, you still have your fans. So it is higher at nighttime in the winter than the summer, but not nearly to the same extent. And so what that looks like is you've got your heating load is the highest right as the sun's about to come up about 6 a.m. in the morning. And so here's what your load is looking like as the sun comes up. Picks back up as you get home from work. Not too bad. And then it picks back up as your heating goes up through the night. Okay? So that's roughly what your load looks like in general for wintertime. And so what you can see here is we have a way bigger battery problem. Not only are you producing way less solar, you're producing it in a shorter window. And your load doesn't line up with the graph at all. And so your battery system becomes much, much bigger. And so if your load was, say, 18 kilowatt hours during the summer, you can imagine this would be 30 to 40 if you're not using propane easily to get through the night in the winter. And since a kilowatt hour of battery is roughly $500 to $600 installed, a 40 kilowatt hour battery is going to be 20 grand. A 30 kilowatt hour battery is going to be 30 grand. Sorry, 40 is going to be 20 grand. 60 is going to be 30 grand. Okay. So it is in our best interest to do everything in our power to fix this. If we don't fix that, you're going to be spending at least $10,000 to $15,000 extra on a battery. And if you have to store all that, if you have to produce all of that from solar panels, you have to make this big enough. And the problem there is you don't get nearly as much power in the winter. And so you might only need 20 panels in the summer. In fact, I've got a customer who uses 6. In the summer, he only needs 6. But in the winter, he needs 45. So your solar panel system has to be way bigger in the winter because it doesn't produce as much. And your battery system has to be way bigger in the winter because it has to store way more power because you're using it at a different time than you're producing it. This is the day to night problem. And if you can figure out ways to fix the day to night problem, which we'll go over in our next videos, the solution to the day to night problem, or some solutions to it, you can cut 20, 30, 40, 50 grand off your system every time, and you'd make your system far, far, far more reliable. The nighttime in the winter problem. So this is the second problem that you have to solve when you're designing an off-grid system. So this is what this problem looks like. Again, we're going to do 2 graphs. This one is January to December. And this is your daily power usage. So we're not saying daytime, nighttime. This is daily power generation compared to daily power usage. So we already have solar, we already have a battery, we've dealt with the day to night problem. Now we have to deal with the summer. I say the summer and winter problem, but it's the nighttime and the winter problem is really what it is, because summer's not an issue. You'll see why. So this is our solar panel output graph, and I'm going to do it in green so that it matches our last one. August, October, December. Green is solar output. This is what solar output looks like. And this is completely dependent on how you mount the panel. So a panel that's mounted flat, straight up and down, it's looking straight up at the sky, it's actually be a lot worse. It's going to look like it's going to start low in January, it's going to be really high in August. And the ratio of production from January to August is going to be like 1 kilowatt hour in January to 4 or 5 in August. If you get your panel very aggressively tilted, say your latitude. So if you're at I'm at 35 degrees roughly. So I have a 35-degree angled panel. I can get this up a little bit to where this is 2,000 and this is 3,000. And so the ratio of wintertime power production to summertime power production is closer to even. That's what we want, because as you'll see, when we're producing power is not when we need power. And we're going to assume that you're heating with a heat pump. The numbers change if you're heating with natural gas or if you're heating with propane, and we'll go into what that looks like. But here's the next part. So your usage is a little bit different. The graph looks a little funny, but you'll notice something interesting. The fluctuations are because of temperature. This part of the year, you're cooling the house. In the fall time, you don't really have to cool the house. You don't really have to heat the house. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of both, but you don't have to do it much. In the winter time, you have the opposite problem. It's just going to go straight off into the distance. You have to heat the house, and you have to heat it December, January. So that's why that graph looks like that. And so what you'll notice is you don't have a summertime problem. You have no summertime problem at all. You have a wintertime problem. And so if you want to solve this with solar panels, you have to build 2.5 times the amount of solar panels than you need. But if you measured it on an annual basis, you're using and producing about the same amount of power. And so this gets out of hand really quick, because if you have to produce enough in January to fix your problem, you're wasting 70% of the power you're producing. You go from a 10 kilowatt, 25 panel system to a 70 panel system to get enough power in January. And so this is the nighttime and the winter problem. And we talked about the nighttime part, that's the day and night. This is just the winter problem. Your solar panels don't produce enough. Your power usage is high. And you can't fix that easily. There are some ways to fix that are relatively easy when you're designing the house and when you're designing your solar and battery system. And that's what our next video is going to be. So we'll talk next time on battery builds.